So I have a question. So what is the, so to say, value, or is there any value in dealing with, so to say, some theoretical aspects of Dhamma, not those that, to say, directly interact with greed and aversion, so to say. So that's, let's say, even questions like if God exists or not, let's say, or any other, like materialism and whatever else.
Right. Well, when it comes to those very kind of abstract theoretical things, especially when you cannot verify them for yourself, like it's going to be to some extent based on speculation, those are always the things that the in the suttas the Buddha would say that those are not the things that he declares, because they're not fundamental to the holy life. So it's actually better to refrain from finding an answer to that type of question rather than finding the answer that kind of corresponds to Dhamma, because if you were to, like you said, emphasize the freedom from greed, aversion, and delusion aspect, eventually you would realize that the only reason that you sought an answer to the question, or that you thought that the question was important, is because somehow you thought that it was going to help you resolve your suffering somehow, or because it was itself, let's say, rooted in greed, in some form of greed, aversion, or delusion. So when that goes away, it's like you wouldn't have an answer to the question, but the question wouldn't appear to you as important. At least this kind of question. Other ones, like let's say rebirth, or I don't know, other realms and things like that, you would then actually have a more practical basis to see what the Buddha meant when he referred to those things, whereas initially you would just kind of be taking it on faith. So you would, for example, be able to see how craving inevitably means that if you die, like it cannot have a beginning. It's not something that can sort of have popped up at some point out of nowhere and then kind of continued by its own momentum. So, but all of those things initially, it's like, rather than trying to figure it out how it works or how it would be, it's if you discern your own mind and you see these things directly for yourself, by freeing yourself from the 5 hindrances and greed, aversion, and delusion, then you would have the quote-unquote right answer, which from the initial perspective, what you expected an answer to be probably would feel like inadequate, but now it doesn't, because you're not subject to all those doubts and pressures, which are really mostly emotional rather than purely intellectual.
Yeah, what you mentioned about like craving and rebirth, I mean, like the fact that craving have no beginning, so that does imply also that kind of there is no magic hand, so to say. Like there is no like craving will not end by itself somehow in the future.
Yeah, you would also come to realize that, like, because it's something that when you discern it in, like, through practice, through gradual training, virtue, sense restraint, seclusion, it becomes apparent how every craving that you ever have can only be there because previously, like when your mind is subject to craving, even though you don't want it to be subject to craving, it's always because in the past you were acting out of some kind of pressure of that mind that made it worse. It's like a fire that, without some fuel having been provided, at some point that fire could not possibly be burning right now. So, like, having a fire that just started, like, you just come and there's a fire there. Nobody lit it, nobody did anything, it's just a fire there. You realize that's inconceivable. But again, like, it would actually be better to put the question aside rather than just receive that as an answer, because then you would still be kind of intellectually believing in something that it might actually stop you from really making the effort to see it for yourself, because you find safety in the intellectual answer. So it's kind of like remaining in that almost harder position of acknowledging, like, okay, well, whichever answer I find, it's going to be like it would only be adequate if I decide to settle for it. I could always question it further. So then, instead of finding safety in those answers, you look for the real safety, which is freedom from craving. And that's why, like, the noble truths weren't like pronouncements about the nature of the universe, but rather about the thing that would want you to that would make you want to know about the nature of the universe. Those were the noble truths. So entirely internal, quote unquote, if you want to put it that way. And also, like, when the Buddha said that somebody who understands rightly would come to see that the arising of the world, the arising of the world, the cessation of the world, is found within this very body, no larger than 2 meters. Because factually you would come to see that all of those notions that you might have as kind of lofty and grandiose as it might be, if you investigate, even on a very kind of coarse level, you would realize, like, okay, there is a kind of bodily pressure that's making me want to think those things. And I wouldn't be able to think about those things if I was, let's say, very sleepy or very tired. So you realize, like, even on a very mundane level of reflection, all of these things don't kind of somehow, you cannot access something apart from your 6 sense bases. So you instead put that first and see everything else through that. Like, if it's a sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, mental thought or image or phenomenon, you look at it through that lens instead of emphasizing the content of and making it special because it's a thought about God or thought about the universe or thought about this. You see, okay, well, however special it is in its content, this has also arisen within this 6 sense body, within this what was the word, the
Fathom, no.
No, but the word was like carcass, like a carcass, the body, like it's within this, and you don't have to deny any content of the ideas that you might have, because that's not where the solution lies. Solution lies in just becoming fully established in the knowledge that, oh, this Dhamma has arisen. And that's how you develop dispassion.
Like, will you talk a little bit more about dispassion, because it can easily be like kind of taken as, oh, is it something that I have to do, that I have to actively try to develop, but it's more like on the level of discerning the right kind of context, as you were talking about before.
Yeah, well, you can use that example as well. If you don't see it on the right level, and you just take dispassion as another mental phenomenon, you kind of take it to be right because the content is right, you would overlook the fact that, well, I have passion towards this now. Like, the dispassion has become the thing that I am obsessed with almost. And then you realize, well, that cannot possibly be, like, it's going to be there to some extent initially when you don't see your mind clearly, but the whole point is you want to reach the point where that dispassion becomes, as you said, something that you discern, something that's there in the things already, not something that you have to manufacture, because that's a contradiction in terms. If you were truly indifferent, if you were truly dispassionate, what need would there be to fabricate anything? So how do you practically discern that dispassion? Well, you have multiple ways. Like anything that prevents you from fundamentally having that special privilege over the rest of your experience is reveals to you that instead of like denying your sense of control and denying your the input that you have over your experience, it becomes contained within something that's fundamentally not in your control. So if you have developed passion towards dispassion, let's say, you ask yourself, okay, well, could I be contemplating and doing all of this dispassion if I didn't have this body here right now? If I didn't have all these, even these ideas that I have about dispassion and so on, those ideas need to be arisen first in order for me to attend to them. If I were to forget all about that for some reason, I wouldn't be able to cultivate anything anymore. So, see, that dispassion now is not on your own terms. It's not like, it cannot be now underlain by your desire, because it's now kind of comes underneath. Whichever standpoint you take, this is before that. And that's when you develop like, well, right view, because basically what you would have when you just have a kind of self-made quote unquote dispassion is that view of annihilationism or non-existence. Like, even if you don't necessarily go to the point of like asserting that nothing exists, nothing is real, and everything will disintegrate when the body breaks apart, and the suttas would say, was kind of the most extreme version of that view. If you have that kind of attitude that takes denial of things as automatically more pure, you would fail to see that, well, that is now the thing that I am passionately established in. So that wouldn't be the right view. Like, the right view is when you undercut even that through the right discernment of, well, you could take whichever angle, but craving, for example. Like, instead of why would you develop dispassion on the wrong level, practically? Why would you develop dispassion on the wrong level? Like, why would you be kind of passionately doing the dispassion? Let's put it that way.
Well, because to some extent I try to do it and I don't see my doing in the things.
But what do you not see specifically?
Well, I don't see my involvement in the things. I don't see myself basically doing that. I don't see.
Yeah, that's one angle. But specifically, let's say, is there something that, let's say, in relation to craving, that you're not seeing? Because, see, you can be thinking in terms of, that would be kind of the common thread of dispassion. It's like, you want to abandon craving, you want to abandon lust, abandon greed. And you're trying to do that, like, genuinely. It's not that you're kind of being lazy or something. You're making effort. But what is it that you're not seeing in regard to that specific craving that would be a problem?
I try to get something from that conversation. Like, I try to trade, like, somehow. I try to get something.
Yeah. So, but with the craving, is it like, where do you find craving, basically? Let's put it that way. Because, see, you would be, when you're trying, quote unquote, to do the dispassion, you have a notion of craving. Otherwise, what would you be directing yourself towards?
That's what I was going to say, is the craving that you are trying to squish, you could say, is, well, it's not the craving that is actually kind of controlling you at that moment. You see something and you have some idea of what craving is, but that is within the actual craving. So it's going to be, well, it's going to be rooted in you not seeing craving for what it actually is, you're going to be focused in on something that fits your idea of what craving is.
Exactly.
And that is going to be too narrow, so to speak.
So what is the problem there with that notion of craving that you have? Is it just that it's too narrow? Or is there something more direct that makes it an issue?
I'm going to try to think of what I mean by too narrow.
Because sometimes, let's give an example. Like, I could, let's say, craving towards food, and I could develop a view that, like, well, as the Jains factually did, like, somebody might have at some point realized, like, oh yeah, I'm craving towards food. It induces sensuality in my mind. So they decide, okay, well, this is clearly a problem. So if I want to abandon craving, I need to abandon food. Or anything else, like specific types of thoughts. When people would say, I shouldn't think about the future because that's kind of
craving.
Yeah, it's craving. I shouldn't have memories about the past and remember things I did or
is it rooted in like
And that would be like trying to make the dispassion, like trying to force.
Yeah, it would be, but specifically there's a kind of wrong notion there. That even if you, let's say, no matter what anybody tells you, unless you fix that wrong notion, you're still going to put the emphasis in the wrong place.
I was kind of trying to think of a more original way of saying it, but like you're focused on the content of it. You're not seeing it on the level of your actual attitude.
Yeah.
Even if you recognize, like factually, you have recognized your attitude in these things before, and like factually, you've seen, okay, like this is craving. You're going to be tying that actual recognition of what craving is to what you were doing at the time.
So yeah, and the danger there is when you then recollect that was craving before, that's now another thought. So so that doesn't necessarily mean that that's not a craving for you now.
So that thought is going to stand for craving in your experience.
Well, basically the problem is that you would have developed you would have started to think about it. It's basically inevitable. Like when you don't see the Four Noble Truths, like you will have assumed or established an objective notion of what craving is. Basically that even if you are looking at your attitude, it's all within the context of you have. Because see, I'm sure when somebody has that view, they would be kind of feeling like they have the craving in their mind when they contemplate food or when they eat food. Otherwise, why would they keep doing it? It would become clear like, oh, well, I feel myself a craving now. But no, it factually continues to feel like, yeah, that craving is there. But the issue is like by putting the emphasis on the blanket view that you developed beforehand, you don't realize that actually, yes, there might be some craving for food, but the thing that's really supporting that whole setup of a mind that's passionate in the most general sense is that craving of you doing this whole thing to begin with, like you overlooking your attitude of, could be restlessness, could be doubt, could be any kind of thing that's controlling you from behind, supposedly making you do something good and wholesome, in other words, abandon craving for food, but actually it is the more fundamental unwholesome thing that's kind of how would you say that, like
the driving force.
Yeah, it's what's underneath. Like,
can you say it's like the theme of what you're doing? Yeah,
it's like when the suttas would describe, you don't grasp at signs and features that will lead to the arising of longing and aversion, I think often people would understand that as like, precisely in this context, like food, if I see a cake that has a nice shape or something, I shouldn't ideally I shouldn't look at the cake at all. If I look at it, I should somehow play with those perceptions so that I don't recognize, like, it's just a shape. It's not really a delicious cake. It's just a brown shape. But actually, the sign and feature is that theme that theme might not be there at that moment. You're suppressing it, let's say. The theme of this food is agreeable, is nice, I want more of it, it's delightful. That's not a kind of thing that you're telling yourself. It's the implication of the thoughts that you would be having when you're actually acting out of craving for the cake. Those would be the kind of themes that are underlying your whole mental activity around this thing. But now, in this context, let's say of somebody who just developed that blanket view of rejecting food because food is rooted in craving, the sign and feature there of the theme that they're developing basically or establishing themselves in is a theme of aversion, theme of restlessness, theme of denial, and they don't see that as a sign or feature that leads to the arising of states of distress, of agitation.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what it means to, because see, the sutta doesn't say he doesn't look at sights on account of which lust and aversion would arise. That's almost presupposed if you're keeping virtue and have some common sense. It's even much more subtle than that. It's having seen a sight, having heard a sound, having smelled a smell. He doesn't grasp at signs and features on account of which unwholesome states will arise. So that's already at a level where you wouldn't be attending to those things like full on carelessly, because that already comes within the virtue basically. Like it's just obvious. This is taking you towards breaking a precept. You wouldn't be attending to it heedlessly. So now within that, when there are things that are, let's say, not unwholesome to look at, nor not unwholesome to smell, not unwholesome to taste, now you have to look at what are the themes, the background themes that I am maintaining in regard to this, whatever object I'm engaging with. And those themes are, it's not, again, it's important to emphasize that it's something that becomes apparent. Like it's pre-verbal, let's say. It's not like a thing that you are saying to yourself. It's the most kind of acute, subtle context behind this whole situation. You could almost look at it as like a very coarse example of it would be like the motivation when you're doing something. Like if you're talking to someone and you're, let's say, using very polite language on the outside, but actually your ulterior motive there, you're not necessarily thinking that in your mind, like that, let's say, I'm angry towards this person and I really despise what they did, but I'm acting out of that anger, but I'm talking to them in a very polite way because I hope that through that they will not do that thing that I don't want them to do again. So that whole sign and feature, that whole theme that you're not necessarily aware of is a theme of aversion. Even though on that external level, you might not even be clear to yourself about the fact that that's the theme. So that's what the Buddha meant with grasping signs and features. And in this context, going back to what we were describing, you would have to extend this principle to anything. And that's how you would start to abandon these views, because you would realize, like, well, there's no value in this. Even if it's the right thing that I thought I got from the Buddha, there's no value in cultivating something that leads to the increase of lust or leads to the increase of aversion. If it does, that means that's not what the Buddha was actually meant. So then you would start to see that, the actual dispassion is a theme that's at that background level, on the level of mind, at the level of citta. You start to realize, like, okay, there's absolutely no benefit if I am thinking thoughts about death and thoughts about sickness and thoughts about losing everything, if the mind, if that animal that's kind of indirectly there at the same time, but it's not the thoughts, if that animal is getting actually agitated and less pliable on account of you thinking those thoughts. Of course, it might be slightly kind of off-putting to reflect on those things, but then that's something that you would begin to be able to distinguish for yourself, like what's the right type of samvega, of being moved by something, as the Buddha said, things that are worth being moved by. What's the difference between that and just winding myself up for no purpose? Because you see, the wrong type of winding yourself up, let's say,
It would be more restlessness.
no, but actually you would realize, like, if I stop doing this, I actually more inclined towards unwholesome states than the opposite.
Can you say that again? The wrong kind of working yourself?
Like if you're just thinking about death, thinking about sickness, thinking about aging.
Like the whole time, kind of restless.
Yeah, but not paying any attention at all to, like, what is the attitude behind this. You kind of just assume that contemplation in itself is right.
Mechanically.
Yeah, exactly. Like a mantra almost. You just, by doing that, you would be putting yourself in a position, you're acting out of hindrances. So actually your mind would be, like, right now it's focused on this because you're forcefully keeping it there. But if you were to let it loose and go wherever it wants, you would find that the unwholesome directions have been either maintained or maybe even increased because you were acting out of the hindrances. Whereas if you were doing it with some recognition of, like, okay, no, my mind was actually obsessed with life and intoxicated with life, intoxicated with youth, intoxicated with health, as the sutras would say. And based on having recognized that theme, you cultivate this opposite theme, then it's like, yeah, you might factually feel a sense of, like, urgency, a sense of disenchantment, even like almost like to the point of being moved by it, like, oh, I should be more heedful, I should be more careful with my actions. But see, that is now actually taking you away from the hindrances. It's leading you in the right direction, and it's, even if it's not, let's say, perfectly peaceful, as it would be to just ignore that you are subject to these things, it is leading to a decrease of unwholesome states overall. So that's why it's like that's similar to the cook. Actually, the Chinese version has a very nice passage that doesn't occur in the Pali one, and actually it was the very thing that we were discussing in that Sign of the Mind talk. It's like, if the cook presents a dish to the king based on his own ideas, his preconceived notions of what the king should be eating, rather than actually paying attention to the preferences of the king and where he inclines, then that's why he will never be able to basically be a good cook and get promoted and rewarded by the king. So it's that same thing, like you have, on account of reading, on account of contemplating, you have developed a blanket view that this food, that this type of contemplation is good because, it's about death, it's about sickness. Okay, sure. There are probably worse things to think about, but if you do it without paying any attention to where you're at, your whole attitude behind it, and you're not even aware, like I said, that there was some intoxication, that there was some wrong attitude there, and you're just doing it because the Buddha said I should do this.
You are cooking for yourself.
Exactly.
Not for the king.
Exactly. So that's why you want to, it doesn't matter what the contemplation is, especially when you're not sufficiently familiar with the science of your mind and you haven't got the right view yet, you should, your main contemplation should be like, what's my attitude behind this? Because that's what will keep you in check. And see, if you are doubtful, like, I'm not sure what my attitude behind this is, well, you should actually redirect your effort to clarifying that most of the time rather than just continuing to, because what are you going to be making foods, like cooking dishes based on probability, like, I think this one is more likely to, well, no, it's better to actually, okay, well, instead of doing this, let me look at the king and see what's actually going on.
What the mind really needs, you mean?
Yeah, like what the mind needs in terms of if it has been inclining you actually see it inclining in the wrong direction. And you realize, okay, now contemplating death will take it away from that wrong direction. But if you just don't know and you just keep doing it, you will be winding yourself up unnecessarily. Because there is no need to make effort unless there are unwholesome states present. That becomes your unwholesome state, your restlessness. Because so that's exactly why the Buddha said, like, you have 4 right strivings. You have abandoning arisen unwholesome states. You have making sure that unwholesome states don't arise. You have making sure that wholesome states arise, and making sure that wholesome states are maintained. So that's an effort in and of itself. And if you only do the other 3, something's going to be wrong. Because sometimes you have at least more wholesome state of mind where there isn't anything harmful at the time, and you need to be able to recognize that and learn how to protect it, rather than constantly assuming like, no, there must be something unwholesome. It's like, no, the king needs more food. Just by default, he needs more. Well, no. Sometimes he just had enough, and that's good for now.